right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you happen to be. My name is Christopher Harrison. This is Web Wednesday, the show where I bring on some amazing people to chat about really cool web dev technology. Now, I've had the pleasure of working with Nitya a handful of times now between hackathons and also working on a video series that you may have seen for JavaScript for Beginners, which if you haven't seen that, you should absolutely go ahead and track that down. But today, we're going to be talking about progressive web apps. And at a real quick high level, for those of you who are not familiar, a progressive web app allows you to create a web app that you could actually install locally. But you didn't come here to hear me talk about this. You came here to hear Nitya talk about this. So let me go ahead and get Nitya on. So Nitya, thank you so much for joining today. It's fantastic to have you here.
Oh my God, it's so fantastic to be here. Every time I'm like in your presence, I just feel joy. I don't think anyone has as much enthusiasm for technology as you do.
You are way too kind. Thank you. Thank you. I certainly try. I certainly try. So one thing that I always like to do is to start with the basic question of how did you get here? How did you become Nitya? So like in just a couple of minutes, like what was your journey to where you are now?
That's a great question. I'm a dinosaur. I've been in the tech kind of space for so long, but I like to say this because I think it's important that we know that journeys differ and it's okay to keep changing careers. So I kind of consider this my third career. So my background is as follows. I'm a PhD in computer engineering. My PhD thesis was actually in fault tolerance for distributed Java systems. And when I was doing this, Java was new. But at that point, that's kind of like my passion was distributed systems and, total ordering protocols and all that stuff. And I joined Motorola Labs because we're trying to build some infrastructure to help distributed systems for the back end of their mobile phone applications. But once I joined, I kind of fell in love with mobile. And I spent over, I think, a decade there in the research division looking at mobile and ubiquitous computing. I really, really fell in love to this day. I just love mobile computing because I think it's the closest you get to the user that you want to give stuff to, that you want to help, right? So I worked in Motorola for about a decade, and I was in research. So I really focused on building advanced prototypes, a lot of patenting, that kind of stuff. And then I think about 7, 8 years ago, maybe I switched and I kind of moved to New York. Oh, I'm sorry, 12 years ago. I have a 12-year-old son. I think that should also kind of give you a sense of why. And I switched to New York, became a telecommuter, and this is when I discovered community. Because I was a remote worker, I was working by myself. I really missed having people talk. I started going down to New York. And that's when I kind of just, this entire world of web development opened up to me because it was really, mobile was great, but web was ubiquitous. So I started getting into web development, started doing a lot of work with it. And then like with things like Flutter and all, started looking also at cross-platform development. And that's where I slowly kind of decided that I really like teaching people how to do stuff, not just building it. And it was at that time that Microsoft Developer Relations was like, hey, we're starting stuff in New York, and would you like to join? And lo and behold, I'm here. But I think if you will indulge me, I will at some point tell you about my Smithsonian analogy, which I think is something I want to tell anyone who hears the term knowledge versus expertise. So
Yeah.
right now, what?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so I say this because after having been in this industry for such a long time, things change always, right? They change so fast and you kind of can never keep up and you suffer with imposter syndrome. You're like, I'm never going to know everything. So nowadays I've made my peace with what I call my Smithsonian analogy. And this is the difference between knowledge and expertise. And the thing here is, I will say that right now I have expertise in mobile and cloud and knowledge in web. And the Smithsonian analogy is, the Smithsonian, right? It's kind of
Sure.
like this giant, right? Have you ever heard the stat that less than 1% of what Smithsonian owns is actually on display? Less than 1%.
I knew that it was a very small amount. I didn't know that it was that small.
It is very small. And that's across maybe, I don't even know how many museums are in DC.
There's
But
a
that means
lot.
that they have these vaults with a heck of a lot of knowledge, right? But at any one point in time, they can only put out so much in the displays outside. So my analogy, which I use to anyone who's a learner, I'm very, very passionate about getting everyone to enter tech, is you're like a Smithsonian. What does that mean? There are only certain numbers of museums that are available, and there's only a percentage of what you actually know that you can put on display. What you put on display is what you're working on right now. That is your expertise. That is your Smithsonian exhibit, right? And people are going to judge you on that. People are going to say, hey, do you know this? Because that's who you are. But in reality, there's a whole lot of experience sitting in your vault. And so every time a new project comes along, there's a new need. This is something cool again. You can dust off all the stuff in your wall, bring it out into the exhibit, and within seconds, not seconds, but over a period of time, that becomes your new expertise. That becomes your exhibit because you're putting effort into daily refreshing it. So that's, to me, the difference between expertise and knowledge. We all have tons of knowledge. So after 2 decades in tech, I have a ton of knowledge. Expertise is what I do by actively working on something. So I just want to encourage people, if you don't know anything, don't say I don't know anything. It's there in the back of your wall. You just have to bring out an exhibit.
I love that analogy. I think that's fantastic. That really drives the point home. I've never heard that before. I love that. I think that's spectacular. I think that's great.
Yes, it is true, because I'll also say you probably have heard a lot about me through my sketchnoting. So nowadays, a lot of people come to me and say like, oh, you're that sketchnoter. And I'm like, yeah, but I do all that stuff too. And then I have to tell myself, they walked into my visual storytelling exhibit. They have not yet seen my mobile app or my patent exhibit. That's okay. That's what they came to see, and we'll talk to them about that. But yes.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, for those of you who aren't familiar, Nitya does these amazing sketch notes, sketch docs that really help explain and like lay out connections and paths and relationships between all sorts of different technologies. It's fantastic. So you can actually see them in some different places. So yeah, they're wonderful. They're wonderful. So cool. Well, let me ask then the most obvious starter question to a creating progressive web app stream, which is, what is a progressive web app?
That is an excellent question. So a progressive web app is an app that uses open standards and APIs to build an experience that does 2 things. Essentially, at the core, it's still a web app, but it can be installed and used with an experience that is very native-like. And I'm going to start saying platform-specific rather than native, but it can perform like a native app because of the way it's structured. What does that mean for you? That means that you can write an app using the web technologies you're already familiar with and potentially have people download and use it across different device platforms. Now, I will say that having come from the mobile space, my introduction to this came through mobile. It was like, oh, I can write a web app and then I can add it to my home screen on mobile. And now it just looks and feels like it's something I installed from the store, right? From the Android store. And that's what that was the intent. But what really excited me more recently is you kind of look at it and go, wait, there are other app stores on desktop too. So Windows 11 was the big announcement that I think really spurred me to come do this. So it's not just about an app that you can run on your phone, but you can find it and discover it and use it on your desktop and in any device that has a compliant modern browser. So the way I think about it, it's like the holy grail for multi-platform. It's like one code base. People can use it anywhere as long as they support modern web platforms and APIs.
Okay. Very cool. I actually, I use OWA Outlook Web Access as a PWA. So I actually don't use Outlook itself. I actually use OWA, and I actually have that installed as a PWA. And it's very interesting to hear you mention that you get a very similar desktop experience to like having it installed, because one thing that I noticed relatively recently, as far as an update goes, is that I could now associate mail links with the PWA for OWA, which is fantastic. So now if I'm like, browsing or doing whatever, I click on a mail to hyperlink, and it will actually now open that up inside of my installed progressive web app for Outlook Web Access.
Yes. And I think that hopefully we'll get a chance to go kind of look at some of the Project Foo and web capabilities and all. But I think that is also one of the bigger exciting areas that we can look at in progressive web apps, which is the ability for us to do things across that installed PWA and potentially native apps on that platform that were built for that platform. So if I can like share, if I'm doing something in my progressive web apps, I can share a photo that I can then kind of pull up a different app, like a Twitter native app, and then kind of, use it there. That really removes that friction, right? Like that's when you really start thinking of it as, oh, this is not a browser. So the bigger story, I think, was when you first think about web apps, the earliest progressive web apps I used to use is, it was all about don't see the Chrome. It should look and feel like a native app, and that means you don't see any of the Chrome. But I think now it's really about the capabilities. It's like, I can do anything you can do on a native app, and it'll behave alongside those. So yeah, I love that. I should have actually added, I think Teams and Outlook too, should have added them as good examples for PWAs. We should go rate them and see.
There you go. There you go. Now, you mentioned a series of like open standards, and you mentioned being able to have one code base and have that run everywhere. And I think that raises a big question, which is, if I'm a web developer and maybe like today I'm not thinking, oh, we're going to do a PWA, but we might want to do this in the future. Do I have to change the way that I do my development if I'm going to be eventually turning my web app into a PWA?
It depends. So I'm going to put on my app developer versus web app developer, because I also want to be very friendly to the mobile folks and say, you can do this too. But I don't know how you guessed that when I was scrolling through this, there would be an answer in here somewhere. I'm going to throw this out and say I'm starting a blog that I'm going to track my learning journey and put resources, so definitely check it out. But this is if you can see my screen and you see this kind of the grid, like, do you see this picture which says native, PWA, and web apps?
Yep.
That's kind of the one that I'm a very visual person. If I can kind of visualize how these things fall into any space that helps me, this is the one that's on the web dev, like what are PWAs canonical article that I really like. And so what I'm going to look at this and say is, if you're a web app developer, this is literally what I've written in the blog post itself. If you're a web app developer, you're in that orange spot, right? If you're a native app developer, you're in the blue spot, and PWAs are in the pink spot. What does that mean? If you're a web app developer, you're already closer to PWAs than you know, because you know intrinsically the technologies that you're going to use to build a web app that will run on modern browser platforms. All you then need to do is to check off the three kind of requirements or capabilities that are needed to convert your existing web app into a PWA. We'll talk a little bit about that, and maybe I'll kind of share some links as well. The reason I bring this up is that it's probably easier for you because chances are you use one of the standard frameworks. Maybe you come from Vue, maybe you use React, or maybe you use Angular. And almost all of the modern frameworks have a path for PWA, meaning that they'll have an example of how you can take that existing app and tailor it. And we should talk about PWA Builder, because you can literally point it to an app and it'll tell you it'll give you recommendations of what you can fix to make your app kind of work well. That said, your choices are as follows. Do you want to take an existing web app and migrate it? Or do you want to build a new app from scratch? And what should you do? That, I think, is a bigger question. And the way I was beginning to look at it is, it depends on what you're trying to do. Who is your audience? If you're building an app that is primarily web-driven, like all the stuff that you're going to do doesn't really require or need a kind of like a native launched experience, stick with your web app until you realize, hey, this could expand my audience to a desktop or mobile, and then go there. Don't have to just migrate it. Don't build from scratch. But if you're trying to kind of realize a new idea, I would say start from PWAs and see whether you can build it incrementally. The big challenge, I think, is really in the capabilities. If you end up using a native capability that's not available in web apps, coming from like a mobile app to PWAs is harder. But from web apps, yeah. The migration, there are actually patterns, by the way, that tell you how to iteratively move from, like, just by moving one feature, or just try kind of getting an offline page, right? Those kinds of things that you can try before you get and kind of jump wholeheartedly into like redoing your entire app.
Okay. This will be I think the last question on this, and then because I know you have some stuff that you want to be able to show off, but you highlighted something there that I thought was really interesting, which is about access to native resources. So when I'm thinking about like a mobile app, I'm thinking about something that's going to be able to access, for example, storage or the camera or the file system or, the microphone, call history, GPS, the location. Like I'm thinking of all of those different things that a mobile app is going to want to be able to access. Will a PWA have access to all of those as well?
Did I feed you all these questions? Okay, so I'm going to take this question in two parts. One is today, if you wanted to do that, right, you might go down the path of using like a hybrid app, like, Ionic and kind of people who give you a container that you run your web app in, so to speak, but they then have the native hooks that they surface up to you. So there is that option if you want to do that. But with PWAs, yes, absolutely. I think this is what I was going to talk about, the Project Fugu, and I should have, let's see if I can find it. Okay, so there is this project called Project Fugu and web capabilities that, we should explore it. It's in that set of links as well. The idea is that if you go with like the hybrid app approach, let's say, right, you're still using native APIs directly and you're using it through someone else's framework. So you've got your operating system with the native APIs and you've got like some layer between you and that one, and then you're writing your web app and you're dependent on them. With Fugu, the idea is that the primary browser vendors are kind of working together to standardize JavaScript level APIs to those native capabilities. So I think that's the biggest challenge is how do we make sure that those capabilities are surfaced in a consistent way across different vendors, first of all, and second of all, what is the priority of those capabilities? And I think what's nice about this is if you look at this Fugu tracker in here, they have a whole bunch of APIs. And if you look at on the right side, they tell you who's supporting it right now, who's kind of looking into it, etc. So long story short is I think of PWA as a great investment for the long haul because work is in progress. Which API is ready for kind of cross-browser consistent usage today? That's a little bit like, watch the roadmaps. But I think that you mentioned file share. What I read in the PWA Builder kit, for instance, is file share is there. The ability to do a share button is there. Web Bluetooth was one of those that came up through this particular approach, right? So depending on what APIs you're looking for, see if they're in here, and then look at what state they're in. And that'll help you decide. That said, there's always, I think, going to be kind of like niche capabilities that are very hardware-centric, perhaps. So spatial computing, you need to have certain sensors. I think those are going to take longer to standardize. So yeah.
That makes sense. I was looking at the list as you had it up there, and at the very least, like some of the things that I think I would most logically or most frequently want, especially things like the camera and so forth. It looked like those were already there. Or already supported. So it looks like at the very least, like that, that old 80-20 rule, that 80% of the time you're using 20% of the features, it looks like there's a good portion of that 20% that I'm going to want most frequently that is supported here.
Yes, and I also want to kind of, just nudge attention to the fact that when you look on the right side, there is not just Android and iOS, but there's Chrome and Windows, right? I remember from back in the early days in PWA, even when you had APIs like, audio and camera, the support across, say, Safari, mobile Safari versus, mobile Chrome was different. So I think one of the things you have to look at is not only is there support, but is there support on the platform that my audience is likely to use? So that is, I think, the kind of sticky point. There are still, when I look at the docs, there are still places where it says, here's how 80% of browser vendors will do it, but then there is this exception, and to handle this exception, write this little bit of code, right? So you haven't got rid of that yet.
Fair enough. Yeah, we're still using vendor-specific tags in CSS. So I mean, I guess we're going to be here for a while.
Our jobs are safe, people. Legacy code is why we all exist.
Oh, too funny, too funny. All right, so you've mentioned the PWA Builder a couple of times here.
Yes.
What is the PWA Builder? Because I like before we hopped on the call, I know you were kind of highlighting a couple of things in there, and I know this was something that you wanted to talk about. So what is the PWA Builder?
So let me kind of start by, we'll just go to the site directly. If you were watching, and we should have put this link in there, if you're watching the Windows 11 announcement, I think it was June 24th, that was like a lot of, there's a wave of happiness around the world because of two announcements that I heard. One was Android apps can now be shipped via kind of like a hook through the Amazon App Store on Windows 11 devices. And the second is PWAs are now, you can now ship them in the Windows Store, right? And it was kind of hidden in that announcement, this announcement about PWA Builder v3, which just got released. So what is it? You can go to the site and follow along, just kind of play with it if you like. So PWA Builder has actually been around for a while. It's an open source, community-based resource from Microsoft that I kind of discovered a few months ago. It was v2, but v3 has kicked it up a notch on a different level. So what is it? First, it's open source. You can actually go from here, click on the button and get on the GitHub button, and you'll be able to go and see all the different packages that are available in the PWA Builder ecosystem, including the website itself is a PWA that's open source. So if you want to go and figure out how does it work, and we'll try to do something interesting in just a bit. If you want to figure out how does it work, this is what you would do. Second is, the most important thing that I think about this is that it gives you guidance on how you can not just build optimal PWAs, but ship them into the store. So if you kind of go into the, I think it was a blog or the documentation, let me see where it is. It's a documentation. You will find a really kind of clear step-by-step approach to how you can package and ship your apps in the Windows Store and in the Android Play Store. And to me, this was what made me want to come back and give this another shot, because I'm like, hey, now you can take an existing PWA that you might have been building for mobile and figure out what does it mean for a desktop user and try to work through this approach. Third thing, and this is actually...
I'm going to interrupt for one real quick second here. I know you've got a third thing, but I think this bears repeating. I can actually publish my PWA to the Windows Store or to the Android Play Store.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. And they make it, they really kind of put a lot of, it's fairly new, so I have to like test out a lot of stuff, but yes. Can you imagine that now you can be on your Windows machine and discover both Android apps and install them, and PWAs and install them? And when we talk about installation, we mean that your PWA installed on Windows is now accessible via your start, your search, and your launch bar. It's like, yes.
And so then from like the enterprise level, if I wanted to use like group policy and like push those types of things out, I should be able to now do that.
Yes.
That's fantastic.
And yeah, I'm very curious about this because I have not developed for Windows myself. So part of my learning journey is going to be, how does the user experience, like there is one thing which is like web app, just skin it, make sure it works. But then there's other thing about user behaviors being slightly different. So I'm very curious. They do have a couple of built examples, I think, that you can use to try this out as well.
Okay. All right. So there was a third thing.
The third thing, and this is what I was excited about. So if you go into PWA, the third thing is, it's actually a fourth, but we'll start with the third thing. The third thing is, what if you don't know what a PWA is? Or what if you have a PWA and I want to figure out, is it ready? Is it like App Store ready for me right now? They have this thing called a report card. So you can feed in the URL of, you can in fact feed in the URL of a website as well. And I'm going to humiliate myself in just a second to make you all happy. But let's say we take a PWA that we know of, and I'm going to use the Twitter one because we all know this is a PWA. So let's see, right? And also kind of helps that they'll have a decent score. You can enter your PWA wherever it's hosted, and it'll run an audit on your site for you. And this is actually super cool because what it's doing is, and this kind of gets to what are PWAs and what are the kind of components that make it unique. What it does is it looks at your PWA and says, are you meeting these requirements? And if not, it's going to try to help you by suggesting fixes. Now, I wanted to put the Twitter one because you can see its PWA score is off the charts. It's doing really well. It says you have a great PWA and your score is in the top 100 of all time. Well, good for you, Twitter. So the thing in this, what it means is that now this is App Store ready. They could possibly take this and ship it as is. Now, let me go ahead and, can I humiliate myself a little bit?
Absolutely.
Right now. Try not to be so enthusiastic. All right. So this blog, and by the way, I deliberately set this blog up. This is a static website using the Hugo. If you ever used Hugo, using a Hugo static website builder. theme running on GitHub pages, bare bones as you can make it, right? It's a website. Now, if I feed this to the same URL, so let's actually open a different page because I want to be able to really humiliate myself by comparing scores. That's the point if you can't, right? But it's really a useful exercise because you get a chance to understand how to fix things. And honestly, please do check back on my blog. I wanted to show you how I was migrating my app, but I ran into some issues. So when I fix them, I'll put them out there. But let's just kind of wait a minute and look at it, and then we'll see. My score is probably going to be, anyone want to guess? Want to guess? Remember, it was 190.
43.
Oh my God, look at that. You're so optimistic. 30. Okay, why is this? And this is literally what I want to talk to you about, because you brought this up before. Like, if I have a web app and I want to know how do I make it into PWA, I like this approach too, right? So in here, what it's telling me is what are the components, the critical components. First of all, security, because I got one thing right apparently. And the security is just because I'm using HTTPS. One of the core requirements of a progressive web app is you have to host it in a server that can be accessed over HTTPS. You need HTTPS to use service workers, but also because it's a secure end-to-end communication protocol, right? So you're like, okay, this I checked off apparently just by hosting it where I hosted. But where I missed out on is the two big requirements, the two things that make PWAs and not just web apps. First is there needs to be an app manifest. And this is why I like the PWA starter. What is a web app manifest? Oh, is it okay to kind of go
yeah. No, sorry. Okay. Yeah, my little was sort of like, yeah, oh, interesting. Okay.
Okay. I kind of get carried away, so please slow me down. So when you think about a web app manifest, think of it as like this metadata file, like package.json, all the things that you use, which describes the app in a way that the browser understands where to find the things it needs to actually showcase this and install it, right? So we'll look at a manifest in a minute, but how do you actually create one? In my case, I was doing a blog. I have no manifest on there. The nice thing about the PWA starter is it'll literally walk me through it. It says, your manifest needs more work. Here's what you need to do. Why don't you try to do it, right? So in this case, for instance, let's say if I say next, this should be slow down. Okay, oh, this is for downloading the PWA file. So we actually have to go fix this first. So you go into manifest options. And now if you look at the manifest options, It tells me that's the one you needed to fix, right? You can see it gives me all the fields and says, fill this in, and then we can see. Now I'll walk through this, but it will fail because I've realized that there's either a bug or I'm not doing something right. However, I want to point something out. In the links that I have on the left side, which I'll share with you afterwards, Christopher, you will know that web manifests have a whole bunch of properties, but not all of them are mandatory. So you don't need to fill them all in. And I think it's not, let's say this is Learn PWA. And we'll just call this short name is what you might want to see. I'm going to call it PWAX. This is what you would see on the icon or on the install screen. Just a test.
I was once teaching a class where I was demonstrating a regular expression, and for whatever reason, I decided I was going to use Social Security number, which for anybody who's not U.S. based, it's 3 numbers, a dash, 2 numbers, dash, and then 4 numbers, and it's something that we use for basically everything as far as like government and identification and so forth. And so I was doing this as my demo, and I just like brainlessly was just typing, and I got like 5 digits into my Social Security number, and then my brain finally clicked in and said, dude, you're typing this in front of your class. You might want to stop that.
I think this is why we're going to need AI, right? It should like constantly be monitoring pixels and be like, that does not look right to you. But yeah, oh my God, we should do a whole show on just ways we've messed up in public. That would be awesome. Anyway,
yes.
These are some of the things I was saying. Like if you look at this upload thing didn't actually work out. It kind of spun around. So I need to go figure all this out. But the idea is that you fix whatever you're fixing. And then when you say done, now you fixed manifest options. You can go in and tell it the same thing. Your service worker needs work, right? Service workers, what are service workers? The most important thing that differentiates a web app and a native app is web apps by default require connectivity to your server because you're kind of like fetching assets and you're rendering the page and whatever you're doing there. Native apps can work offline. So the first kind of order of business for making a good quality PWA is to make sure that you have some acceptable offline experience, and service workers help you do that. What's a service worker? It's like a worker that runs in its own thread, and it's really helping kind of be a proxy to your network requests, right? So anytime you're trying to like access something, if the network is available, you can go fetch it from there. Otherwise, it'll actually maintain a cache locally, and the service worker decides. It takes decisions based on whatever policy you decide to figure out every client request coming in. I'm going to proxy it and decide, do I go to the network? Do I go to the cache? Do I go to the network and then fill the cache with what I fetch back, etc. Most critically, it helps make sure that your offline versus online experiences are seamless. So there's a lot of work involved in terms of adding the code. This is what you need to do. And again, service worker options. Here's why this I really like. Now, it doesn't totally work for me yet, but I'll work on it and tell you how to fix it. But this is what it means. What are the different things in a service worker? Like you need an offline page. What does that mean? If my network is not available, I need to have a default experience that they can see so that they're not just seeing kind of like the, much as we all love the edge game, my kid just literally wants to play surfing games all the time. That's really not the experience you want to give for an installed app, right? So offline page, then there are cache first network, advanced caching. So all of these things are kind of patterns that you can use in your service worker. You can basically say, I want this capability, I want this capability. And when you're done, what it does is it generates for you. So here I've got all my service worker options. Remember, I did some fixes to my manifest. I've done some fixes to my service workers. Now I go in and it literally lets me generate the files and add them in. This is where I need to go figure out what's happening because it keeps giving me this error. So I need to go figure it out. When it does, I'll fix it and let you know. But under the covers, what it's using is Workbox. So we can talk a little bit about Workbox. Workbox is one of the tools from the Chrome developer team. And what it does is it actually has the JavaScript files that kind of implement all these. It's almost like helpers with all the kind of most popular design patterns implemented. So you can, in fact, go through Workbox directly and try to fix it yourself, which is what I'm trying to do. But hopefully this will happen when it happens. What happens then is you're getting the manifest and you're getting the service worker files, and then you can walk through the next steps, which is make sure that it runs, test it, and then kind of get to the point where you can package it and ship it to the stores. So that end-to-end experience of like, I have an app, please help me through kind of fixing it, I think is super cool here.
I really dig that. I really dig that. As a real quick side note, Brave Cobra mentions that they disabled cache completely on their PWA because apparently it was just too aggressive when it came to caching. And then he goes on to say that there are only two things that are hard in programming: naming things and caching.
I totally hear you there, but I'm actually very surprised. So when you say you disable caching, does that mean you're doing everything over the network?
Yeah, I'm curious. We'll see if he replies. Yeah, there's always a little bit of a lag.
Yeah, I'm very curious to understand what your user experience. There's nothing wrong with that either. But it would be super kind of cool to understand what your user experience was. Also, I am very curious to understand why your cache was running out. So if you go into kind of like the dev tools, you can look at what your storage quotas are based on your browser platform of choice. And I'd love to know what made your cache run out. There are also policies you can use to tune when you want to cache stuff versus not. So maybe you don't need to cache everything, but you could cache, for instance, like things, if someone was actually working their way through a workflow and you don't want them to lose all of that, you might be able to cache at least that level of compute.
I could see that. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. And I will show you one other thing. Do we still want to talk a little bit about PWA Builder?
The floor is yours.
All right. I will talk about this only because this is where I want to go. So we talked about PWA Builder having three things, right? One is this report card. So it'll assess the app store readiness of your app and suggest things that you can do. Second is it will help you actually package or guide us for packaging, shipping it to the app stores. But the third thing is if you actually go into the GitHub org for PWA Builder, this is the last thing I want to talk about. They have what's called a starter. And if possible, we can see if we can try to actually run one. So what is the starter? The starter kit is really kind of like a complete PWA scaffolded app that has already been set up with a service worker, places for manifest, simple routes, uses lit, which is lightweight web components, and we'll kind of do one if we have time, and depending on what you want to do, we'll try to actually use it and run it through their own report card. It'll have a really high score. It's very light. I think it's almost 100 Lighthouse score as well. So in a sense, you're getting out of the box a fully featured route friendly PWA that you can then start scaffolding out. And if you're interested in what that looks like, I actually am working on seeing what it takes to deploy these to GitHub. This is my version of what that looks like. I had to tweak the colors a little bit because the default colors couldn't be read. But you can see that it really just has a very simple kind of routes, tells you what it's using. Here is my kicker. PWA Builder, currently all the samples and all are using TypeScript. That means I need to skill myself up on TypeScript. But
I have a course for that.
Please, we need to do this. What I did find is looking at the source, it's really, and I think maybe Christopher, you will agree on this, TypeScript is actually very easy to read and understand. It's like kind of like figuring out what's happening where. So this is the stack they use under the covers. If you want to get started with a PWA, and just for the heck of it, since this comes from the starter, if we have time, I'll kind of show you how that's actually run.
Yeah.
But I'll show you what the score of this is. So this is the one I've deployed right to my GitHub endpoint. So if we actually look at this, you'll see that its score is super high. So it kind of comes out of the box compliant. And all you need to do is add in your code for the different routes and then keep testing and so on. So PWA Starter Kit, that's my first tip. Go check that out. And then let me see. There's one other thing I want to talk about. So one of the reasons that I had actually looked at this, so it's in here. One of the reasons I looked at this, and I put them in the links at the bottom of my favorites tab, is with PWA Builder, there's a whole bunch of example apps there are articles with example apps that I think that really kind of drew me to, hey, we can use this and try to build something on it. I want to point one of them out because I did come from Google. I'm a Surface Duo fan, so I got to say this. I thought this was pretty cool. There are dual screen APIs that through media queries, you can kind of create dual screen behaviors. So with PWA Builder, there was a blog post shared on the Surface Duo blog just a couple of months ago that walks you through an example of an app that you can use starting with PWA Builder, a progressive web app that is also kind of configured to use the dual screen media queries and kind of build a experience that is optimal for those kinds of devices. So definitely check this article out. And if you're interested in it, they also have two other things. This one I'm a little bit, why not? So what was worrying me about this is look at the date on this. I'm like, was it supposed to have been published and they didn't know? Do you see what I mean? We're living in the future right here. But anyway.
Hey, I mean, at this point, what is time? It could very well be July 15th today for all I know. I mean...
Hey, we are all variants. This is all I'm hearing from my kid. We are all variants. All right, great. Okay. But what I will love about this is with PWA Starter, they're using components, right? So they actually have a PWA inking component that you can use to do 2D drawing. And this is, a little passion of mine. So one of the reasons I like this starter kit is the samples they have. They have a drawing app, an inking app, and a dual screen app. So definitely go check those out.
I dig it. By the way, I want to go back real quick to the PWA that you deployed that had the really high score.
This one, yeah. This is just their starter.
Yes.
Yeah.
So just because I want to highlight the user experience, that for anybody who hasn't interacted with a PWA, there's an icon in the upper right corner of the browser in the address bar that looks like the three little boxes and then a plus there, and that is what you could then use if you had navigated to the site to then install it. So if you're poking around on Twitter or Facebook or YouTube or Outlook Web Access, Microsoft Teams through the browser, you'll notice that icon in the upper right. That means you can then install that as a progressive web app.
You set me up so well. I'm like, shocked that we didn't talk about this. But yes, absolutely. And I will point out two other things. So first of all, this is the dialog. So when you see this, you immediately see this, install it as a PWA starter app. And if we were to install it, we can actually do that and try it out. But you'll notice there's also a button at the bottom. You see that, right? So there is another place for you to actually install that as well. And there is a third. So let's see if I can find the third one. The third one is in apps, and you can basically install PWA starter app through this. So there are three different places where if you're on a browser, you can do this. However, can I elaborate on just one thing quickly?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is actually super important. And as somebody who loves understanding user behaviors, I think it's important we all think about this if you're actually designing for PWAs. So one, when you think about the button here and you think about the browser, so the browser platform has the ability, there's a big difference between these two. One is the browser is recognizing this as a PWA and giving you either through the settings or through this little kind of like hint that you can install this as a native app, right? Like you can install it on your device. But this button is actually an application UI choice, right? So it means that and this is super important. And there's actually a wonderful page. It's in those links. If you want to, I'll open it up. But there's a wonderful page that talks through the implications and design patterns of deciding when you want to do this. Because this install thing that you have here is an event. Like there's an event that's sparked when you basically click that button, which gets processed and then causes this to be installed. You want to decide when do you want to let the user do this. When they manually click it, that's okay, right? That's a manual choice. But what if you want to present it to them as an in-app UI recommendation or suggestion? You are more likely, and this goes to like the bigger picture of analytics and understanding and engaging your users and making sure they keep coming back, right? So if you just throw this out here, there's no reason, they haven't done anything on your app to kind of make them want to install it. But let's say they've come back 10 times and they've done a bunch of stuff. That's the point where your analytics tells you this is an engaged user. Maybe they don't know there's a PWA and I can bring this up to them. That requires a little bit more thinking. And there's a ton of really good design patterns that help you balance kind of in your face, install me now, versus, hey, what would you think about this? And is this the right time? So there's a whole bunch of kind of great articles on analysis, right? Like understanding, getting insights and user behaviors and picking the right time to ask them to install it.
Okay, I no that actually makes a lot of sense. That reminds me an awful lot of like the hamburger conversation. Which for anybody who's not familiar, the hamburgers, the three little lines that you'll see in like the upper left, upper right corner of like mobile apps, and it's actually like even still today like slightly controversial because there's still a fair amount of research that shows that there's a solid percentage of users that don't understand what that hamburger is supposed to do, or that if they tap on it, that it will then give them more information.
Very, very true. And the other side of it also is that, you kind of want to, so there were like little tips like this. So this is the installing part, but the whole purpose for the installation is that you want to make sure that the user is kept aware. So you can send push notifications, all that kind of thing, right? How do you know they're engaging in it beyond that point? So I think that there is a lot of interesting stuff that web frameworks, like folks who are building web frameworks, can talk about in design patterns for building, flows based on the pattern, like you're doing, list and detail views and things like that. When is like this install PWA starter is just a button hanging by itself. Where would it make sense for me to kind of put that in there and then see whether they pick this up?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I'd like that up at the top. I'm a big fan of PWAs. I do have a real quick question for you though. And I want to start here before we get into it. Have you worked with the PWA support in Angular? And no is a perfectly acceptable answer.
I'm going to say no.
Okay.
But maybe, because I actually worked with PWAs 3 years ago when they were new. So that time I was looking at using web components with PWA, and I had kind of like Angular had a whole bunch of stuff going on as well. That said, not at all currently. I do know that I think Ionic has a good Angular and React starter version that is PWA compliant. Why do you ask?
Because the question was this is what it's across like three messages, so I'm going to try and package this together into one nice neat question here, which is what's the difference between using PWA support in Angular versus like adding in like service worker, install app support, the manifest, and everything else?
You mean like having an Angular pre-built app and then manually just adding in these three things versus using Angular's built-in PWA flow?
I believe that's the question, yes.
Okay, I have not used it, so I wouldn't know details, but on a general level, I would say that the biggest thing that you're going to get is, so for example, like if you look at the PWA started using lit elements and a whole bunch of things, right? So I think that what you might get if you start with the Angular PWA workflow is you get it built into your boilerplate. It kind of comes out of the box, because when you do a PWA and you have to do service workers, you have to figure out where's the route, the scope of your different routes. You need to set up your state, like where are the requests coming from, etc. So if the Angular framework is actually simplifying some of those for you, so that even the examples are like, okay, if you're doing this, then these are the messages that you need to capture, I think that could be easy. That said, I don't know what current Angular looks like at all. So no clue. But that would be my guess. The big difference between something that a framework intelligently does, knowing its routes, knowing its state, knowing its flow, versus you just having to manually, because you put a service worker, you manually have to craft all of those, right?
Yep. No, I appreciate that. Okay, cool. All right. So there was something else that you wanted to show off.
Oh, let me see. So I actually had a bunch of, since you brought this up, let me see if I can share these. So I had a bunch of links to examples that I thought we could, if anyone is coming for it. So with PWA Start, it's TypeScript. If you want to just start with like basic JavaScript, there's like a whole bunch of vanilla HTML, CSS style things. But I want to also share a few examples of people who had built. So this was the Ionic one. So you can go in, and I think they use, is this one that uses capacitor? I don't remember. But they have, I just want to share the links for, if you want to build a PWA with Ionic. This to me was kind of interesting. So for any Flutter fans out there, Flutter is a mobile, right now, cross-platform framework, which uses Dart under the covers. So they started supporting progressive web apps as well, because you can transpile from Dart. So if you want to kind of try looking at Flutter, there's an example for that just came out in May. Create React app has part of the boilerplate workflow itself. There are a couple of steps to make that your React, make it a progressive web app. From the Microsoft side, for all the C# fans out there, this is something that I hope to explore. If you want to try PWAs, there's a whole tutorial and resources for doing this with Blazor and WebAssembly. And then I basically wanted to kind of do a couple of tests with different PWAs and check them out. But I also, let me see if there was anything else.
Yeah, we got about 7 or 8 minutes.
Okay, so should I share is anyone on the call a brand new, like completely new to progressive web apps and needs a resource to get started learning it?
Let's say yes.
Okay, so I will share a couple of resources up front. So one is Microsoft has a really great kind of like on the doc side, the Edge team maintains it. So you want to go check this out. One caveat, this is what I was telling Christopher right before we started. This is a really simple example of getting started with progressive web apps, but it currently points to an older version of PWA Builder. So I'm hoping to write a blog post that corrects this. But otherwise, this will get you started on a very simple version. The other thing that I really liked was Google and May just released a course. And I don't know if I have it here, but let's see if we can find it. I think it was web dev. So if you go to the web dev site, oh, there it is. So this is a great resource because they have a bunch of code labs that you can go into that just explain individual little kind of features. So build your first tiny service worker, figure out how to do a manifest, then figure out how to make your web installable, app installable, etc. So definitely check that out. And then what are the other things? Anything else? Oh, yes. So Can I Use should be your friend. So have you ever used Can I Use, Christopher?
No.
This is one of my favorite sites. So the biggest challenge I find these days is whenever you use anything that's in the web domain that's a fairly new feature, you want to figure out how is this being supported across different browsers. Can I Use is a site that lets you do that. So for PWAs, the most important thing is service workers. So if you go to Can I Use and look at the service workers, Can I Use service workers, it'll tell you the status of support across all the browsers, not just desktop, but mobile. So this is super useful. So if you want to figure out, like if you're building something to just play with the ideas, great. If you're building it in production, you want to make sure that your audiences, like whatever browsers they use or devices they're on, those are kind of supported. So I think that's a good one. And then what was the other resource I had? This one. This
Somebody else had earlier commented about IE. I was just noticing IE is just like all orange and sad over on the lower left. Anyway.
Okay. All right. The other thing I like is, so to me, whenever I think about, the differentiating features of Progress Web Apps, there's service workers and then there's Web App Manifest. Same deal, Web App Manifest. This is the Mozilla resource. I really like them because you can kind of like see they're in progress, they're being updated, but they kind of systematically go through a whole bunch of different developer-focused issues. This is important because this is a Web App Manifest. I think there are about 19 properties, but they're not all required. So what they go through at the end is, if you go down here, it looks at who's supporting Manifest, etc. So you can find out, right, like which of these browsers are supporting them, and then which properties are being supported. So not everything is going to be uniformly supported right now. So those are, I think, the two. Anything else that I can think of? I was actually going to show you how to just quickly run a PWA starter, but maybe we don't have time for that.
If it'll take like 2 minutes, you've got 2 minutes.
Oh, all right. So we can do it very, very simply. So there are two ways to do it. One is you can just go into this and wait, am I logged in? So if you go into the PWA Builder, the easiest way to do it is you just go into PWA Starter. It's a template. So you can literally use this template, it'll fork it and give you that entire kind of code base, and then all you have to do it. So I've actually created a version of it. I've installed it. I've downloaded it from a zip file. So I'm going to just unzip that. And all you have to do, it's as simple as this. So if you kind of look at this, there are just 2 steps. Once you've downloaded this code, and by the way, gosh, you got to look at it. So you go into this and so you just have to do npm install npm run dev. So I've had them do the dependencies. So once we have the dependencies met, if you do a run dev, it'll actually launch it locally.
Are you on the? Oh no, sorry. Carry on. Ignore me.
Yeah, it's over there.
Yep.
Okay, so they're done. So now if you do npm run dev, I want to just show this to you because you'll see that the version that comes up. So do you see it just launched it there? Takes a minute, but this, do you see how the font colors are terrible? This is why I changed that a little bit. But that's it. It's as simple as that. And right now, when you've kind of got this running, it has service workers installed. Anytime you want to figure out what's the PWA support in yours, you can go in here, look at service workers are running. You can see that it's basically activated and running. Manifest exists. There's even, I think, screenshots does not specify its size. Okay, so there are certain things that need to be fixed. But anyway, it's as simple as that. So you've got yourself a running PWA scaffold, and now you can go in and kind of start working on your actual routes and component-based pages, but TypeScript. And I think with that, I will stop. I actually, last shout out is please do check back on this blog. When I fix my migration thing, I'm going to put that there. And last but not least, if you do have a static, like this was deployed to GitHub Pages, there are really nice articles that show you how to take static websites and basically optimize them for PWAs and then deploy them to something like Azure. So
perfect.
I'll add that into as well.
I love it. There we go. Cool. Yeah, thank you so much for walking us through all of that. That was quite a bit, but it was all wonderful. Like it was all just like really helpful. PWAs is something like I was sort of like kind of familiar with, so it was great just sort of seeing all of the resources, and then especially just like, oh, okay, if I wanted to create one now, this is where I can start. This is where I can get going. And yeah, definitely, obviously, keep an eye on your blog. You share a lot of great information. And then also, if you're not following Nitya on Twitter, do you even Twitter? Like seriously, you should be following Nitya. She's fantastic. And then you can also see some of the sketch notes that
Yes,
she shares.
I do have a visual guide to PWA coming out. And I will leave you with this final thing. I was looking for, like, what do all the analysts say? Forrester literally is like, is PWA at an inflection point? And they say yes. So nice article, because it has links to all the popular frameworks and they're ready to go. So cool.
Love it. Fantastic. Thank you so much again for joining. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. We're here every Wednesday with somebody new and talking about some topic. We're gonna have to figure out how to get Nitya to come back on and do something else. But in the meantime, thank you to everybody. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday or your Thursday, depending on what time zone it is you happen to be in. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.